Apple's Mail app has been broken for over a decade. And for the first time, Apple is finally admitting it out loud, not fixing it quietly, not burying a patch note in a beta changelog. Admitting it, on stage, in front of the entire world at WWDC26. If you've ever searched for an email you know exists and watched your iPhone shrug at you like it's never heard of it, you already understand the problem. But here's what almost nobody is talking about yet. iOS 27 isn't just patching search. It's quietly turning Mail into the smartest app on your iPhone. And once you see everything packed into this update, you'll understand why this might be the most underrated release Apple has shipped in years. Let's start with a confession, because that's really what this is. During the WWDC26 keynote, Apple's own VP of OS Program Management, Stacey Ford, stood on stage and said something companies almost never say about their own product. She admitted, "We've all had that moment where you search for something you know is there, but it just won't show up." Think about that for a second. That's not marketing language. That's not a polished feature pitch. That is Apple, on the biggest stage in tech, publicly acknowledging that its own Mail app has been failing at the single most basic function an email client is supposed to perform, helping you find your own email. And here's where it gets worse before it gets better. This isn't a small isolated glitch that only affected a handful of unlucky users. This is a problem that has existed for years, quietly frustrating hundreds of millions of iPhone owners every single day. If you have much history using Apple Mail, you already know its search feature hasn't always been the best. That's the polite version. Ask around and you'll hear a different tone entirely. Longtime users of the app have long described Apple Mail search as lackluster, and some would say that word is far too generous. For years, the fix people wanted most wasn't a redesigned icon or a new color scheme. It was simply this: let me find my own emails. And for years, Apple didn't deliver it. So what changed? Why now? Why did Apple suddenly decide, after all this time, that iOS 27 was the moment to finally rebuild Mail from the inside out? The real story isn't really about email. It's about something much bigger happening across Apple's entire operating system strategy. And Mail just happens to be the app where it's most visible. Read that again. Mail isn't getting fixed because Apple suddenly cared about email. Mail is getting fixed because Apple is rebuilding the intelligence layer underneath everything you touch on your iPhone, and Mail was the most broken, most obvious place where the old system had completely failed. Here's what's actually happening under the hood. iOS 27 brings a completely rebuilt Mail search, built from the ground up with a new on-device index, a relevance ranking system, and the ability to re-index old emails that were previously invisible to search. That last part matters more than it sounds. Re-indexing old emails means Apple isn't just improving search going forward. It's going back and rebuilding the map of everything already sitting in your inbox. Years of buried confirmation numbers, old conversations, forgotten attachments, all of it is getting reprocessed. The emails you know exist, but could never find. Your iPhone will finally be able to surface them. But this is where the story shifts from bug fix to something far more strategic. Because what Apple built here isn't a smarter filing cabinet. It's a system that understands what you actually mean, not just what you typed. According to Apple's own description of the feature, this new ranking system brings the most relevant results to the top to help you find what you need right away, even if it's buried deep in your inbox. Relevant. And the way Apple demonstrates this should tell you everything about how far this system reaches. If you search for dentist, Mail can now surface an email from your dental clinic, even if the word dentist never appears anywhere in that email. Sit with that for a moment. Your phone is no longer matching text. It's interpreting intent. It's connecting a category of meaning, dentist, appointment, health, clinic, to a message that never used any of those exact words. This is not simple keyword indexing anymore. This is semantic understanding operating quietly inside an app people have used for 15 years without ever expecting it to actually understand them. Apple isn't hiding this shift either. The company is calling the feature expanded search results, a semantic search system that ranks results by relevance and understands what you mean rather than just the words you typed. And critically, this isn't a hidden back-end change users will never notice. When you open Mail Search in iOS 27, you'll see a banner labeled Expanded Search Results, explicitly signaling that the app is now searching by intent instead of relying purely on keywords. Apple wants you to know this changed. That's not a small detail. Companies don't advertise internal engineering shifts unless they believe it's a genuine competitive advantage. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because this isn't a one-way system that just spits out a static list and calls it done. The new search includes a back-and-forth conversational capability, meaning follow-up questions, refine the results, rather than forcing you to start an entirely new search from scratch. Think about what that actually means in practice. You search for something broad, Mail gives you a set of results, and instead of throwing that away and typing an entirely new query, you can narrow it, refine it, the way you'd refine a conversation with an actual assistant. This is Apple quietly admitting that search isn't a single action anymore. It's a dialogue. Now here's the part almost nobody expected, and it's arguably the boldest move buried inside this entire update. Apple is opening Mail's suggestion system up to the outside world. Suggestions at the top of messages have existed in Apple Mail for years, but in iOS 27, they're getting a new, more flexible design, and expanding to support third-party apps. For over a decade, Apple has kept its system apps tightly walled off, favoring its own ecosystem over outside developers whenever there was a choice to make. This move breaks that pattern. Third-party apps are now being allowed to plug directly into one of the most used surfaces on the entire iPhone. That's not a minor UI tweak. That's a philosophical shift in how open Apple is willing to be with the apps living at the center of your daily routine. And this escalation doesn't stop at search or suggestions. It moves straight into something Apple has resisted touching for years, the voice layer. Apple has added Ask Siri buttons throughout Apple Mail, matching the same pattern rolled out across the rest of its system apps. And Siri AI now brings a whole new set of capabilities specifically for Mail users. This is where the update stops feeling like a patch and starts feeling like a full reconstruction of what Mail is supposed to be. Search wasn't just fixed. It was handed over to a conversational AI layer that understands your inbox the way a human assistant might. Here's a real example that's already circulating, and it perfectly illustrates just how far this reaches. One person on social media asked the new Siri to delete every message from a specific sender that had been spamming them, and it simply did it instantly with no manual filtering, no digging through settings, no building a rule, just a spoken request, and the inbox cleaned itself. Think about how long people have been asking for exactly this. One of the most requested features from longtime users has been the ability to set proper mailbox rules the way Apple already allows on macOS. And instead of finally building that out as a manual settings menu, Apple leapfrogged the request entirely. It didn't give you a better rules builder. It gave you a voice command that replaces the need for rules altogether. But this is where the picture gets bigger and where you start to see why this single app update matters far more than most people realize. Mail isn't just getting smarter search and a spam-erasing voice assistant. It's being wired directly into how you write. iOS 27 introduces Write with Siri and a style-matched smart reply system built with Apple Intelligence, meaning the suggested replies Mail generates now attempt to match your own writing style rather than producing generic, robotic responses. This is a direct answer to the most common criticism of AI writing tools, that they all sound the same, flattening every voice into the same sterile corporate tone. Apple's approach is different. It's not trying to replace your voice, it's trying to imitate it. And just when you think the update has shown its full hand, it reveals a feature that connects Mail to a part of your phone you'd never expect it to touch: the phone app itself. Call context is one of the less publicized features in iOS 27, and it runs directly off your Mail inbox. When you call an airline, a retailer, or any number tied to a relevant email thread, the phone app automatically surfaces confirmation codes, reservation numbers, or order details right on screen during the call. Picture the scenario. You're on hold with an airline, frustrated, trying to dig through old emails on a second device to find your confirmation number while a representative waits on the line. Under iOS 27, that number is simply already there on your screen the moment the call connects. No searching, no app switching, no fumbling. This is where Apple makes a very deliberate point about privacy, and it's worth paying close attention to how carefully they've worded it. Apple states that call context looks only at who you are calling, not the call audio itself, and that it runs entirely on device, meaning no data is shared with Apple or any third party. In an era where every AI feature seems to come with a quiet trade-off involving your personal data being sent somewhere for processing, Apple is explicitly positioning this feature as the opposite. Intelligence that lives entirely on your device, watching nothing but metadata, sending nothing anywhere. Whether that promise holds up under scrutiny is something we'll only know over time, but the framing itself tells you exactly how sensitive Apple knows this territory is. Think different. Now here's where the escalation ladder climbs again, because Mail isn't just reading your emails to help during phone calls, it's reading them to help you plan your entire day. Mail now surfaces intelligent suggestions based on the content of your emails, similar to what Messages already offers. If an email contains a flight time, a dinner reservation, or a delivery window, Mail can suggest adding it to Calendar or pulling up a relevant photo with a single tap. This effectively brings Mail up to the same functional level Messages has enjoyed for years, closing a gap that's existed between Apple's two primary communication apps for a surprisingly long time. I think different. But here's an important limitation buried in the fine print, and it's the kind of detail most coverage glosses right over. Contextual suggestions in Mail are launching in English only. That's a meaningful caveat. If you're using Mail in another language, this particular intelligence layer simply won't activate for you yet. A reminder that Apple Intelligence rollouts have consistently arrived unevenly across languages and regions, and iOS 27 doesn't appear to be breaking that pattern. I think different. Speaking of uneven rollouts, this is where the story takes a sharper, more geographically complicated turn, and it's a detail a lot of casual coverage is quietly skipping over. Not every user is getting the same iOS 27. Apple Intelligence features, including the mail upgrades described above, require an iPhone 15 Pro, an iPhone 16, or any iPhone 17 model to function. If you're carrying an iPhone 14 or earlier, you can install iOS 27, but the intelligence layer powering search, smart reply, and call context simply won't be available to you. The operating system updates, but the experience fractures depending on which hardware sits in your pocket. I think different. And it gets more complicated still, because this isn't only a hardware story, it's a regulatory one. Siri AI is not available at launch in the European Union or China, two of the largest smartphone markets on Earth carved out entirely from the headline feature of this release. Think about what that actually represents. This isn't a bug or an oversight. This is Apple navigating a minefield of regulatory pressure, data governance law, and geopolitical friction so significant that an entire flagship feature simply doesn't ship in those regions on day one. The most talked about mail upgrade in years, and hundreds of millions of users are locked out of it purely because of where they live. Think different. Now, let's pull back and look at what's happening around mail, because this update doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a much wider shift across the entire operating system, and understanding that context changes how you see everything above. iOS 27 also introduces real-time scam detection, a proactive system that actively monitors high-risk activities such as online payments or sensitive data exchanges, and issues alerts when it detects potential scams. Put that next to the smarter mail search and the picture sharpens. Apple isn't just building a more helpful phone. It's building a phone that actively defends you, watching for danger in the background while making your daily digital life frictionless in the foreground. Geeky gadgets. The update also brings a captive Wi-Fi autofill feature, automatically filling in login credentials for networks you've previously connected to, with those credentials synced across every device linked to your iCloud account. On the surface, that sounds like a small convenience, one less login screen at a coffee shop or an airport, but it's really another data point in the same pattern. Apple removing friction from moments that used to require your active attention, replacing them with something that simply happens for you. Geeky gadgets. And Mail itself keeps expanding beyond even the features already mentioned. The updated Mail app introduces integrated package tracking, simplifying the process of managing your online orders directly from your inbox. Combine that with the calendar suggestions, the call context integration, and the semantic search rebuild, and a much bigger picture starts to form. Mail is no longer just where your messages sit waiting to be read. It's becoming a command center, a place that tracks your deliveries, remembers your appointments, prepares your phone calls, and cleans itself on command. Geeky gadgets. Even the interface itself hasn't escaped this overhaul. iOS 27 brings visual refinements to Mail, with toolbars made more uniform to improve legibility for text headings and larger groups of controls, and sidebars that now extend to the edges of the window rather than floating, giving the app a cleaner, more consistent look. On its own, that might sound like a cosmetic footnote, but layered on top of everything else, it reflects something bigger. An app that is being rebuilt from its foundation upward, function and form both getting attention at the same time, as if Apple decided this was finally the year Mail deserved a complete rebuild rather than another incremental patch. Think different. So when does all of this actually reach your phone? The iOS 27 public beta is expected to roll out in mid-July 2026, following the release of the third developer beta in early July. That means if you're not a registered developer, you're only weeks away from being able to try this yourself. And the full public release isn't far behind that. iOS 27 should launch this September, arriving alongside the iPhone 18 Pro and the rumored folding iPhone. Notice what that pairing suggests. Apple isn't treating this as a quiet mid-cycle software update. It's timing the most significant Mail overhaul in over a decade to land at the exact same moment as its most ambitious hardware release in years. That's not a coincidence. That's a coordinated moment designed to make the entire Apple ecosystem feel like it's leveling up all at once. Geeky gadgets, cult of Mac. But here's the question almost nobody is asking out loud, and it's the one that actually matters most. If Apple could build all of this, semantic search, voice-controlled inbox cleanup, style-matching AI replies, cross-app call intelligence, why did it take this long? Apple has openly acknowledged the inconsistent search results that have regularly frustrated iPhone and Mac users trying to locate an elusive file on their devices, stating that it completely revamped on-device search specifically to address this long-standing problem. That's an admission of years of accumulated frustration, finally addressed in a single release. And it raises an uncomfortable follow-up question that lingers underneath all the excitement. Was this a technical limitation Apple simply couldn't solve sooner, or low priority that only became urgent once competitors and public criticism made the silence too costly to maintain? Cult of Mac. Even the reaction from Mail's most dedicated long-term users carries a strange mixture of relief and lingering skepticism. One commenter responding to the announcement pushed back immediately, arguing that instead of just fixing search, Apple should focus on making its spam filter actually work, since the Mail app has long struggled to properly distinguish and classify junk mail. That reaction tells you something important. Even as Apple rolls out its most ambitious Mail update in years, the people who've suffered through the app's flaws the longest aren't fully convinced the fundamentals are fixed. Confidence, once broken by years of underperformance, doesn't rebuild itself with a single keynote demo. Cult of Mac. And that uncertainty extends even to Apple's own engineers, at least based on how they're talking about the update publicly. Even journalists actively testing the iOS 27 beta describe the update as promising but still early, noting that it's too soon to fully judge whether Apple has actually succeeded, since the new and improved search appears to be closely tied to the broader Siri and AI upgrades rolling out at the same time. That dependency matters. If Mail's search improvements are wired into the same underlying AI system powering Siri across the entire OS, then any weakness in that broader AI layer could ripple directly into the one feature people have been begging Apple to fix for over a decade. 925 Mac. So step back and ask yourself the real question hiding underneath all of this. Is iOS 27 simply fixing Mail the way the headlines are framing it? Or is Mail just the most visible casualty of a much larger transformation happening across the entire iPhone? A phone that is quietly being rebuilt around a single idea, that your device should understand you, not just process your commands. Search that understands intent instead of keywords. A voice assistant that deletes spam without being told exactly how. A phone call that already knows your confirmation number before you ask. A reply that sounds like you wrote it because, in a strange way, it's learning how you write. This is not a bug fix. This is a blueprint. And the real story isn't just what got fixed in Mail. It's what this reveals about every other app on your phone that Apple hasn't touched yet. If this is what happens when Apple finally turns its full intelligence stack loose on its most neglected system app, the uncomfortable question becomes obvious. What does that mean for every other corner of iOS that hasn't been rebuilt yet? What happens when this same layer of understanding spreads to notes, to photos, to files, to every app you've quietly tolerated for years without expecting it to ever really change? iOS 27 arrives in beta within weeks and in full release by September, right alongside a new iPhone lineup built to carry this intelligence forward. But whether this genuinely marks the end of Mail's decade-long reputation for frustration, or simply the beginning of a much bigger and more complicated shift across your entire phone, is still an open question. One thing is certain, Apple has finally admitted the problem out loud, on its own stage, in its own words. The only thing left to find out is whether admitting it was the hard part, or whether the hard part is still ahead.